Hello and welcome to the Doofcast, a film and TV podcast from Doof Media. I am your host, Scott Daly, and joining me, as always, is my good friend, Matt Freeman. How's it going today, Matt?
Call me King.
I don't want to. That's weird, actually.
But it's my name.
It's weird to insist people call you King. Can we just make a general declarative statement of that? That's a weird thing to do.
But what if it's your name?
It's not his name.
I thought it was his name. I thought it was his middle name, actually.
Oh, was it? I don't know.
The point stands that the reason why he wants people to call him King is because he's the king. In the movie we're talking about this week.
Yeah. Oh, yes, that movie. That movie, which is part 3 of our ongoing series, taking a look at the potential 10 Best Picture nominees, hopefully in time for the Oscars themselves. This week, we're taking a look at Martin Scorsese's latest film. Okay, hold on. Is it Scorsese or Scorsese? Because, I listen to a lot of film podcasts, and literally both versions are said equally as much.
So I think between the two of us, Scott, we're roughly one Italian person. And the natural pronunciation to me is definitely Scorsese. So that's what we're going to go with.
Okay. I like it. There it is. It's official. Yeah. We could just look it up, but not going to do that. It's Scorsese. And his latest film is titled Killers of the Flower Moon. So we're going to take a look at this film that I am pretty confident, Matt, will be a Best Picture nominee. The nominees actually come out next week on the 23rd. So before we meet for our fourth movie in this series, we will know officially what the 10 Best Picture nominees are, and hopefully we don't have to make too many changes to our list. I think these 3 that we've covered, I'm pretty comfortable about, and the one that I'm pick for next week, which I'll tell you at the end of the episode. But we'll know for sure next week.
Yes, I have faith, Scott. I have faith in you.
I will say the Producers Guild nominations came out over the weekend, and their 10 nominees for Best Picture in the PGAs was the 10 films that I put together for this list. So I'm not giving myself credit, because really all I did was go to a bunch of Oscar prediction websites and compile them into something that I felt was the most reasonable. So it's not my doing, but still just a pat on the back there.
I think that's what you call expert knowledge right there, is the ability to synthesize disparate sources of information into a coherent whole.
Sure. I'll take credit for that. That's fine with me. So yeah, we're going to be talking all about Killers of the Flower Moon. And then I thought we'd wrap things up, Matt. We both been watching a little bit of TV. I thought we'd have just a really, really quick, short segment where we fill each other in on some of the TV we've been watching.
Sounds good.
All right, let's get into our main segment. Let's talk about Martin Scorsese's Killers of the Flower Moon.
Osage. They have the worst land possible. But they outsmarted everybody. The land had oil on it. Black gold. Money flows freely here now.
I do love that money, sir.
Matt, what is this movie all about?
When oil is discovered in the 1920s Oklahoma under Osage Nation land, the Osage people are murdered one by one until the FBI steps in to unravel the mystery.
This movie was written by Eric Roth and Martin Scorsese. It is based on the book of the same name by David Gran, and it stars Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, and Lily Gladstone. And it's another Martin Scorsese picture, Matt. Where do we begin with this one? What did you think of Killers of the Flower Moon?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Where do we begin? I kind of never know where to begin with Martin Scorsese, because he's one of those directors who's not really first and foremost trying to entertain you. He's often making deliberately unpleasant movies in at least one way. And it's funny. I was thinking, before and after watching this movie, I was like, do I even like Martin Scorsese? And it's and it's kind of like a stupid thing to say, because it's like he's an amazing filmmaker. He's just an objectively amazing filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the movies he's made are just great films, but I always feel sick during and after watching them.
Sure.
But that I'm pretty sure that's exactly what he wants to do. And this movie maybe the worst when it comes to that in terms
Yeah.
of making you just feel like sick and hopeless about the state of humanity for pretty much the whole time you're watching the movie, and it kind of gets worse as it goes. So he succeeded at making me feel really bad.
Yeah, man, I agree with you. I think one of the ironic things about Martin Scorsese, though, is that I think he does a lot of the times make very fun movies to watch. You know, like Goodfellas is a fun movie to watch. Casino is a fun movie to watch. I think been this thing that's happened with Scorsese is like every time he releases a new movie, people interview him and they ask him about Marvel, and he gives the same answer he always gives, which is like, I think those movies are bad and bad for filmmaking. And then all these people get really pissed off at him and are like, oh, you just want films to be a bunch of boring art house films. And it's like, have you watched Martin Scorsese movies? That's not what they are. But I do think like this is a movie that like I there's no fun in it really.
Yeah.
Like you think of The Departed, there were like I thought The Departed was a fun movie to watch, even if it was horrifying and awful. I think the same about Goodfellas, Casino, like all these classic Martin Scorsese, you know, crime films. I thought The Wolf of Wall Street, I thought was a horribly disturbing film, but also like really fun and funny. This movie is just awful.
Yeah.
And I loved it, by the way. I thought it was a masterpiece. I think this is Scorsese kind of, you know, a man's 80 something years old. He's not going to be making too many more movies, and he's definitely like reflecting on his career and also on the world in a lot of really interesting ways. And this is a tough sit for sure. This is 3.5 hours of a film that is depressing, shocking, horrifying, rage inducing, all those things. You feel all those emotions, and you're right, Matt. He wants you to feel those emotions. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It does not surprise me that this movie is not going to make back its budget, though, because it's tough to like wholeheartedly recommend this movie to people.
Yeah. I mean, even before, like, I kind of didn't want to watch it because I knew enough of the subject matter to be like, this is a true story about just like some heinous shit that happened.
Yeah.
And I don't want to have to dwell on it. And I'm not a good enough person to feel obligated to dwell on it, but we have to watch it to make a podcast about it. So I did watch it. And honestly, I don't regret watching it at all, because it's so well done and beautiful in its like artistry, even while depicting horrible things. It to me in some ways sort of felt like thematically and like tonally very similar to Raging Bull, which was another movie that I didn't like, while appreciating it as like a genius work of artistry. It's like a movie that you kind of hate to watch, and you hate the character, but also there's part of you that, even though you hate Robert De Niro's character in Raging Bull, who's the protagonist in that movie, there's a part of you that wants to see him change, or just like wishes you sort of see him as a victim in the specific sense of like he can't help himself, which
Yeah.
and then another part of you doesn't believe that and is like, well, you know, we shouldn't absolve people of treating others the way that he treats people in this movie. And it leaves you with this tangle of emotions and feelings. And, it does what good art does, which is it nettles you, it perturbs you into really asking yourself questions about human nature and personality and the limits of what we can forgive people for and what we can expect of people. And that, so, this movie, the dramatic heart of it, interestingly enough, is often residing with, Leonardo DiCaprio's character, who is very much like this Raging Bull character, where he is a pretty bad person who does a ton of awful things, and he tells himself this story that allows himself to be okay with it. And the story gets stretched thinner and thinner as the movie goes on. And you like, despite the fact that he just does the worst things, you feel maybe a little bit bad for him, despite all of that, which is a remarkable accomplishment, actually.
Well, he's kind of just an idiot. Like
Yeah, yeah,
he's just an idiot that's being manipulated by someone else. And yeah, he's awful. Like I think a fun game to play is like which person is worse, Leonardo DiCaprio or Robert De Niro's character. And like Robert De Niro character is like straight up evil, like just a monster.
yeah,
And Leonardo DiCaprio's character Ernest is so much more complicated than that, in that he is participating in all these terrible things. And it's like, okay, so which is worse, the guy that's kind of upfront about their greed and evil, or the person that needs to tell themselves a story in order to do things but still does it anyway? Like which is worse to you?
yeah,
I don't know. That's a good question. I don't even know if I know the answer to that after this movie, but
yeah.
I,
Well,
I tell you what,
yeah,
we on Kingslingers, we've been reading a book called Desperation, and Desperation is Stephen King kind of writing a biblical story and grappling with the question of, why do bad things happen to good people, and what is the nature of God and the nature of life, and all these things. And no spoilers, but I think King's conclusion on that idea is one of like, yeah, things are bad, and people are bad, and the world is a cruel place, but like there's good and love and all these things here. And I love that message in that book. But let me tell you, going from that book to this movie, it makes it really it makes it really, really hard to
yeah,
grab onto that message. One of the things in that book, with the statements in that book, was God's cruelty is refining, right? And you look at this movie and you're just like, nah, man. Like no fucking way. What is refining about any of the things that happened in this
yeah,
story? Like what lesson did we impart from these things? Like what trials and tribulations did it strengthen in the people that survived these things? And it's like, this is just horror, monstrosity, greed. It's just every worst instinct of mankind all bundled into one string of murders.
yeah.
Yeah. Ugh.
I mean, the slightest sort of, I don't know, silver lining is too strong a word. It's like we get the emotional satisfaction of the fact that m- most of the characters who did wrong do go to jail, but then they get out before they should get out. You know, um,
Yeah, and they all live Molly died before all of them, right?
yeah,
Like,
Molly died before all of them because of her diabetes,
yeah,
basically,
yeah.
and there's no real sense that justice was done. I mean, it's mildly satisfying, but it's not really justice.
Well, that is the thing about the Scorsese crime picture, right? Like, they do have a kind of sort of a formula, right? Which is, you see the character get into this, and there's the kind of the initial rush of getting away with this thing, and the becoming more daring, and getting more and more and more, and then it all eventually comes crumbling down when the law comes in and starts investigating it, and the characters are invariably caught. They invariably go to prison, but then there's always like a coda on the film that is like, yes, so what though? And I think the coda on this film, if we want to jump to that, is one of the most like impactful things I've ever witnessed, especially in a Scorsese film, is that we cut from this horrible scene, where the Lily Gladstone character Molly is basically trying to get her husband to admit that he poisoned her, and did it so she would die and he would get all her money. And despite the fact that he's admitted to basically everything else, he can't admit to that. And she leaves him behind, and that scene ends. And then we cut to a radio true crime presentation of the Osage murders. And it's so uncomfortable, right? Like, and this is Scorsese commenting on, I think, a lot of things, right? I think he's commenting on the idea of our true crime obsession. He's commenting on the idea that these horrible events that have happened have been not glamorized, but just like smoothed down to where we're telling like a fun story. Like a lot, like this, I don't know if you knew this, but this is the first case the brand new Federal Bureau of Investigation ever did. It's like the first one. and it's kind of become glamorized as like, look, this is what the FBI can do now. We have this new bureau that can do things like this. It's like, great, but but those things are still happening, and I don't know. Like, what did you think of the whole radio show performance? I was horrified.
Yeah, I guess to me it had the dramatic impact of removing the sort of cathartic satisfaction that we in some sense in a normal movie should have gotten by watching Leo get handcuffed and put in jail, and seeing these events play out. It was like
Hmm.
it ended just at the moment where we couldn't possibly feel anything good about these things, and then it just it cut directly to this radio play, which presented all the remaining information in this very distant way, as you say, not just distant, but sort of like repackaged for your consumption as
For
entertainment.
entertainment, yeah, yeah.
um
And like, the to I think intentionally an all white audience. So we get a camera shot of the audience sitting out there. It's a bunch of white people. The one of the voice actors is doing an quote unquote Indian voice for one of the Osage characters. I think these are choices that were all very intentional in what Scorsese did here. And then of course the biggest choice of all, which is when it comes time to read what happened to Molly, um, it is Martin Scorsese himself that steps up in front of the microphone and reads what the end of her life was.
yeah, I thought that
And
was such an interesting choice.
yeah, yeah,
um I mean, it really it seemed somehow very appropriate to bring the full gravity of the situation, where it's like, yeah, the director steps out from behind the camera and he tells you how this all ended up, and it's really pulling away the artifice, despite the fact that he was indeed trying to on some level entertain us with this film. He's dead set on making sure that we don't walk away from the film thinking like, that we had a fun time and that justice was
yeah.
done.
I
Yeah.
think Scorsese has always done a very good job at drawing that delineation and making that clear. But I know not everyone agrees with me on that. Like, I remember having conversations with people after the Wolf of Wall Street, talking about like he made that lifestyle look too fun and and like he was like celebrating these people. And I was just like, no, 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 you don't understand. Like, that's the build up part of it. And then there's the turn, and the way that movie like mercilessly mocks those people. But I do think that moment, the choice for him to stand up there himself, is him in many ways, to me, looking back on his career of making entertainment out of these true crime stories and taking some level of responsibility for it, and being like just what you said, like, I built these things to entertain you. I did that, and this is a version of what it looks like. But at the end of this, to make sure you understand, I myself am going to step out in front of the camera and I'm going to read to you what happened to this woman, what the rest of this woman's life were, and the ways in which the things that happened to her family were completely forgotten outside of a fun podcast or radio show we can do.
Yeah, it's
Um,
interesting. I didn't think much about the sort of true crime angle of all of this until you're talking about it now, honestly. Because we as a society, we do have a weird attitude and relationship with true crime, and I include myself in that, where it's like there's definitely something fascinating, um, even about like a really horrible story. You're absorbed by it,
mhm.
and uh, it's strange because it's like, yeah, I'm basically being entertained by this horrible tragedy that befell this poor person. um I don't know, I don't quite know how to feel about that. It's not actually something I've spent a ton of time struggling with personally, but you're sort of forcing me to think about that angle of things here. I guess to me, if I'm going to just take a stab at it off the cuff, it's like, well, making people aware of something horrible that happened can obviously serve a vital function in terms of warning people about similar things that could happen,
Mhm.
and about just raising awareness of the historical event, so that you understand the reality of the world that you live in, and so that we don't sweep stories like this under the rug because they're uncomfortable for us. And so if you have to accidentally entertain your audience on the way to accomplishing those other two goals, then I think that's probably a worthy trade-off. And I think that's what he does with this movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I think this is him kind of wrestling internally with all this stuff. I mean, obviously, he felt enough conviction to continue to make the movie, right? He thought it was important to tell the story, and I agree. Like, I will say, me personally, I knew, like, broadly that, like, that I knew, the broad strokes of the story, that there was this Osage tribe of Native Americans who, the greatest irony of all is that we being the United States, moved them onto land nobody wanted to try to get them out of the way, and then oops. Turns out this land was incredibly valuable because it had a bunch of oil on it, and then we immediately start fucking over these people that we have already fucked over hundreds of times before again, anew, and that there were a bunch of murders. Like, I knew that broad story, but I didn't know the detail of it. I didn't know how deep it went, and the conspiracy and all this stuff. So I liked watching the movie and learn this thing. Like I think it's good to be horrified by our past. Sometimes it's good to look at these things and say, this happened. People did this. Our country did a lot of this. And I do think there's value in that. I do also think there is something really interesting to the idea of Scorsese, has made a career out of telling, based on a true story, true crime type stuff, and reflecting on that in his old age. Like, what responsibility do I have to this? Like, is this a good choice I've made with my life to tell these kind of stories and do these kind of things? And I don't even know if there's a definitive answer here. It's just kind of like it's just like his line there is just, it says Miss Molly Cobb, 50 years of age, passed away. She was a full-blood Osage. She was buried in the old cemetery. There was no mention of the murders when she died. And it's not even, it's just like it's not a shrug, but it's just like a sigh, like just a sad sigh of a statement.
Yeah. I'm thinking about how I think he does succeed maybe in a lot of ways more with this movie than he did with the movie like Wolf of Wall Street, in terms of conveying what you were saying a second ago, where it's like part of the movie is depicting this rise and kind of this rush and this excitement. Even if it's like terrible things are happening, it's still kind of exciting in the way that like a Coen Brothers movie can be, where it's like Fargo is a made up story and it depicts horrible things, and you're kind of like, yeah, this is sick and I love it. Whereas this is true things and you're kind of less excited, but you're still a little bit excited, inevitably, because you're a human. But I think he does a better job at just arranging the movie around that so that it tonally works better for me. So like one thing I thought was fascinating about the structure, and I'm almost surprised that it works so well, is the brazenness with which these murders are being carried out. Like the whole plan is just repeated instances of Robert De Niro telling, one or the other of his nephews, basically, like, go hire this lowlife bank robber or bootlegger or whatever to murder this guy or this woman, or arrange this marriage over here and then murder this person. And it's so obvious. Like there's we're mainly following these couple of characters, but at one point, the Osage are like, there have been like 26 murders in the last few years or something, and it's shocking in that moment because you don't even really know that. The movie hasn't shown you that because it's focused on these particular characters, and that causes you to realize, like, oh, it's a shooting gallery. And it's so, again, brazen and bold that it really forces you to realize, like, well, he expects to get away with it because this is the world he thinks that he lives in, is a world where there's no justice for these people, and he knows that he's sitting in a position of basically infinite power socially and politically relative to them, and there's nothing they can do about it. Like they're incompetent in the eyes of the state, literally.
Yeah.
What are they going to do, even if they suspect that it's him? And but that's why, to me, like the most satisfying moment of the movie isn't even the trial. It's somebody's knocking at Leo's door, and he opens the door, and it's Jesse Plemons. And Jesse Plemons says, "Yeah, I'm with the Bureau of Investigation." And of course, Leo's character has no idea what that is, but you're like, "You're screwed, Leo.
Yeah.
It's over for you." And that, it doesn't quite go as wonderfully as you would hope, but it's like the world has actually shifted a little bit. Like I just her going to Washington and doing that brave thing at great risk to herself actually did successfully get the world to shift just a couple degrees, and now at least the federal government is interested in pursuing justice for something like this, which is remarkable. I think in the 1920s it was probably shocking, right?
Yeah. I mean, they even kind of believed it. So I think it's one of the characters says like you're more likely to convict someone of kicking a dog than killing an Indian, right? Like they like
Yeah.
and yeah. I mean, that's the interesting thing this whole thing rides, which I agree with you. Like you get this moment at the end of the movie, this sort of moment of pathos of like, at least these guys didn't fucking get away with it. They got convicted. They went to jail. The murder stopped. And it's like, well, and then the movie kind of goes, well, did they? They both got out of prison after a few years. The Osage, by the way, I looked this up. The Osage sued the government in 2000, in the year 2000, for misappropriation and the a bunch of that they were mispaid and abused, and they settled out of court for like several $100 million. But in the year 2000, Matt, finally got some of what was owed to them. But it's there's like you like, I agree, like it's good that this system came out there and put and solved this crime because nobody else was going to do it. And they didn't. I kind of like that there's not really like that much clever detective work going on. Like to your point, it wasn't like a really clever, intricate game William Hale was running here. He was just telling people to kill people. And like, so how they solve the case is just go, hey, that guy tell you to kill someone?
Yeah.
And they're just like, yeah, he did that.
Yeah. I mean, I got to slightly correct myself, because really the most satisfying part of the movie was watching all of the murderers fall over like dominoes as they arrest them, and then they're like, hey, did you murder somebody for Hale? And he's like, no. And then they're like, okay, well, this other guy over here says you did, and he's like, fine, I did it. It's like, just illustrates how flimsy this whole thing was. And how it was inevitable. Like part of you while you're watching is like, well, this was inevitably going to be found out. There was no way he could have gotten away with it. And then I think the truth is actually like, no, he totally would have, if the federal government hadn't done an unprecedented thing by creating a Department of Investigations with federal mandate and previously never before seen powers of I mean, I don't know. The FBI can do all kinds of stuff that the state cops can't do, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think one of my favorite scenes is when Robert De Niro goes to turn himself in, and he goes to the local sheriff, the people who are supposed to represent the law in the area, and they're kind of just like incredulous that he would be charged for anything. Right? They're just like, what? Like, it seems like, I don't know. My interpretation of that scene was like they weren't even aware of what he was getting up to, because they weren't bothering to investigate anything, because he's got such a grip on everything there.
Or if they were, they didn't care. I mean, I think that was one kind of shocking element that the movie, I think, does successfully convey, is just the massive degree of casual racism to a level that you kind of know intellectually was really the case in that period of time. But I thought one of the most disturbing lines in the movie is when they De Niro goes to the scene of where the house has been dynamited, and it's just a crater basically. And I don't even know who the guy is. Like some other man of like political significance is standing there, and he basically says like, "King, I think you're announcing yourself a little bit too loudly." Is more or less what the line is, and to me that just said like all these other guys know that it's him behind all this. It sort of has to be, just if you're just being Sherlock Holmes and standing back and asking like who benefits from this. Clearly it's obvious who benefits from this. It's always King and his family directly who benefit from this. And that guy knows it, and he's not going to do anything about it. He's just telling him, he's just like, "Hey man, as you're knocking off all these people, I'm just letting you know you're being a little too obvious about it." Yeah. Which is such a upsetting thing to hear in a movie like this. It's like you said, everybody in the town, at least all the white people in the town, I think, are just like, don't see a problem with it, basically.
Yeah. The two doctors that like destroy the bodies to destroy the evidence, right, are just going along with it. I guess King is a really interesting character to me too, and I think we talked at the beginning about how he's just more brazenly evil than the Ernest character, which is very true. But I did find it very interesting his idea in his head that the Osage love him, right? And he's like that, he's learned their language, he speaks their language to them, he has great respect for these people, which is all bullshit, right? But there's, I think, a part of him that does believe some of it, right? Like I think the conversation with him and Leo at the very end of the movie, I think, is so good because he's like, no, the Osage, they love me. You don't understand. They love me. Like they'll let me back. Like I've done all these things for them. And then he writes the letter to them, like basically that we see in the radio play. That it's like even at the end there. I mean, I didn't know whether to read that as still part, like he's still trying to play the game even then, or a part of his warped, twisted mind truly believes that that these people loved him and he had their best interests at heart throughout this whole thing. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think that he sort of had a kind of paternalism toward them, where he really did think that they were, to use the legal term, like incompetent to take care of their own needs, and furthermore that they didn't really deserve what they had got. So he was kind of going to be their friend while robbing them.
Yeah.
But I think he just thought very little of them. I mean, I think I don't think he cared much for them other than as means to an end.
Yeah.
And I think he did think that they were fond of him, but to him that was just instrumental, almost just like, well, they're too dumb to have noticed what a conniving snake I am. So they're just so easy to manipulate. I'm just gonna keep doing that, basically.
Kind of like the dog that, you can beat the dog, but it'll still come back to you for food the next day, right? Like he treats them like animals, kind of. Yeah. I did want to highlight like the thing he says in that conversation between Ernest and William at the very end, where Ernest is basically telling him, "No, it's over. They don't support you. It's over." And what William Hale says here, Robert De Niro's character, is there might be some insurrection for a while, but then people forget that. They don't remember and they don't care. It will be another ordinary, everyday tragedy. And like, he's right, right? Yeah. Like that's the actual tragedy of this whole thing, is that he's right. Like people forgot about this or didn't care, or it just got filed away as another one of those bad things that happened back then, that we don't need to think about really that much anymore. Like, yeah. And William Hale gets to go on and do whatever he wants. He's not supposed to come back to Oklahoma, but he still does pop in every so often. And like, he was 100% right there.
Yeah. There's just something so especially evil about this whole situation. I mean, it's always evil to, murder someone and take what is theirs. That's a horrible thing to do, but there's something like particularly dark about the idea that you're going to cynically marry a woman with the intention of murdering her for her money, like,
Mhm.
and it didn't just happen once. it it's so like that's what makes the whole thing so dark and like depressing and upsetting about the, makes you question the nature of humanity. Is it's like, um when you first hear about this story, you're just like, no, that's people aren't like that, people aren't that bad. And it's like, no,
No,
yeah,
that
they
happened,
are.
yeah.
um
And that, I mean, that is why I think the question of which one of these two guys is worse is such a fascinating one, because like Ernest did that, right? Like it's one thing to command your nephew to marry this person and then convince him into to killing her, but it's another to do that. And the thing about Ernest is, and I believe this, is I believe he loved Molly on some level. Like love is this very complicated, weird emotion, right? That doesn't
mhm.
always make sense. And I believe at least he thought he did. He genuinely thought he did, that he loved her. Um and the question becomes, how how could you do this to a person that you love? Like how could a person do that? Like how do they rationalize it and justify it? And the fascinating thing about Ernest is like he doesn't spend a lot of time and effort into actually making that rationalization happen. He just kind of acts out of fear of his uncle or uncertainty or greed. Oh, he's such a really interesting character. I hate him. I hate him so much.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I think there's some element of him being afraid of his uncle, but that's not like an excuse. And I think he's
No,
just not honest with himself. He's, like you said, he's just kind of an idiot. He's a useful tool, and that doesn't absolve him of anything.
no.
Um,
But
and
it's just like, how do you like go out and kill your sister-in-law and then climb back into bed with your wife, you know? Like I just
yeah,
like how do you do that? How do like that one of the most shocking moments of many shocking moments is that he's out there like robbing Osage at night. Like he gets with his band of men and goes out there and uh throws a cap on his head or a mask on his head, and he's robbing people. And then he like goes home to court this one Osage woman, and it's just like,
yeah,
what are you what are you doing? Like how do you justify this life? How do you do this? How do you and like I think the most fascinating part about him is that part at the end where he admits to everything, right? He admits to being a part of the murders, he admits to doing all these things. The one thing he will not admit to, the one thing he will not admit to at the very end is that A, he married Molly because he was told to, and B, that he poisoned her. He will
yeah,
not admit to those things.
yeah. Yeah, I think the movie, at least in the film, I don't know about in real life, right? But in the film, I think it's pretty clear that he did love her, right? Felt
Yeah,
some large degree of devotion to her, and um, and this was even evident to Hale, because Hale would sometimes put up a little trial balloon along the lines of like, you know, insinuating we're gonna have to kill her someday too, so you can get the head rights, and he would, never really be down for that. And I forget, yeah, I forget the exact mechanics of the scenes, but I remember distinctly at one point when Hale is just expressing genuine surprise, like, oh, you actually like her, that must be your particular pre-version. um
yeah,
it,
yeah,
like literally telling him to his face, like, oh, you really love her, so you're a weird pervert, I guess.
uh-huh.
um and for Leo's part, he just kind of takes it because that's his relationship with his uncle.
Yeah,
um and I think, even I think even the idea of poisoning her, like, I think he just contorted himself into a position of believing that, oh, we're not drugging her with poison, we're just giving her some kind of medication that'll slow her down. We're just going to slow her
yeah.
down,
Just
and
slow her down a little bit. Yeah, yeah.
while they're probably
Fucking
giving her something
ridiculous.
that's just slowly killing her bit by bit.
Almost certainly. Yeah.
Yeah,
I do think like to make the comparison to other Scorsese pictures again, like the question you have to ask yourself is like, for what? Like with all the for what? For money?
Mhm.
But like it doesn't feel like I don't know, at least depicted in the movie, it doesn't feel like the money that they're getting is like providing them this rich, wonderful lifestyle. Like that is the thing that I think Scorsese did, in Goodfellas, in Wolf of Wall Street. Like you see the exorbitant amounts of money that these people have, and the lives that it allows them to lead. And you can kind of be like, okay, I get it. Like I could never be that person. I could never do that thing. I could never be that selfish and evil and awful, to murder people or to lie to people or to cheat people. Like I couldn't do that. But like I get wanting to have that life, right? I totally get that. There's none of that in this movie, right? Like what does Ernest do with the money he's earning from this thing? Well,
Yeah.
he gambles, he gets drunk, and also kind of nothing, right? Like there's no moment in this where we get to see him like living it up with all his rich Osage money. No, no, not at
Yeah.
all.
I think the closest we get is they have nice cars and they have what is apparently by the standards of the day a nice house, although to us it doesn't seem like a nice house.
Yeah,
And
it's certainly nice, yeah, but it's
but
not like
yeah,
extravagant.
it's not Great Gatsby, or
Yeah.
it's not Roaring Twenties nice, or at least not the way
Mhm.
that we usually think about it in a Hollywood context. No, I agree, and I think that that's interesting, and also I think it kind of helps you to, like you were saying a while ago, not overly glamorize the characters and their decisions.
Yeah.
It's hard to do. I mean, it's hard to not do that. It's hard to not glamorize evil.
Yeah.
I forget there. Maybe I can find this link in something we can put in the show notes or something. But I read this article recently, and it just made this point of like it's almost impossible to not glamorize dictators, because there's just something so alluring about like the power and the drama, like the inherent drama of being a dictator, being like this incredibly powerful person who has
Mhm.
seized power through some dramatic action and now stands on the world stage, and their every decision shifts history. And even the evil violence that they partake in kind of takes on this patina of like, well, this is legitimate violence because now it's violence on behalf of the state. It's not Putin doing this, it's Russia doing this.
Sure.
And so we put it in a different pocket, and it's a general phenomenon of how we think about. So it applies to dictators, but I think it actually just applies to like you do something sufficiently horrible, and you sort of, due to the screwed up psychology of humans, that almost elevates you to a realm where you're like, oh, you're like a monster, which is kind of like a god
Mhm.
in the Greek myth sense of the word, where it's like you're sort of superhuman, and we can't judge you by human standards. And I think that's maybe the trap that some would argue Wolf of Wall Street falls into, where it's like once your crimes become fantastical enough, then you're kind of a character to us.
Yeah.
You're not really someone we see as like, oh, that's Fred. Fred robbed a bunch of old widows. He's a piece of shit. He deserves to go to jail. It's like, no, this is Jordan Belfort. He's a different class of person. You see, he stole hundreds of millions of dollars. That means he's better than us. Like this is kind of the cogs and gears that are in the human mind to some degree, right? And I think this movie does a great job of just not indulging in that, honestly, and I appreciate that, and I think that's interesting.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. For what it's worth, I personally do think Wolf of Wall Street makes its opinion clear by the end of it, that like it is attacking us for
Mhm.
doing that to Jordan Belfort. Like the ending of that movie is Jordan Belfort at a convention, like talking to people about how to sell them a pen, and there's this crowd that knows who he is and what his crimes, eagerly eating it all up. And that shot is framed for it to look like a movie theater, and so it's supposed to be us in the audience. It's Scorsese saying, you're the problem, you person
Yeah,
watching this movie right now, it's you. Um, So, but I agree generally with everything you're saying there, and I do think that's something this movie is not at all interested in doing. I don't. There's no one that I think comes away from this movie going like, man, that Ernest sure wanted to be him.
Yeah, right. I can totally understand his decisions.
Yeah,
I think one great thing the movie does to make sure that you never have that emotion is that his uncle paddles him in the uh, uh, Mason. What is it?
the Freemason. Yeah,
The Freemason Hall in a way that's just totally emasculating and makes him seem pathetic. Right.
hmm
I think that's important to the mechanics of making you realize this is not a cool guy. Also, just the fact that Leo makes himself look ugly and
Oh my
stupid.
god. Yeah, let's talk about the performances a bit because yeah, I
Sure.
mean, so many of the choices with this character were done in mind of making him like not like you take Leonardo DiCaprio, an extremely good-looking man, right? And you just and it's not just the fake teeth, which that they go a long way, right? Like it
Yeah.
mucks up his pretty boy smile a lot. Um, but it's the way he holds himself, it's the way he talks, like he's so the way he moves his mouth and like
Hmm.
the way he smiles and the way he frowns and like all of it is he's doing it just an incredible job at making this guy seem, equal parts dumb and and just like squirrely and at the same time there has to be a little bit of charisma in there, right?
Yeah.
Because like you have to kind of understand why Molly like fell for this guy. Like
Hmm.
that even knowing that at least part of him wanted her for her money, why she was enamored by him. Like so you have to see a little bit of that, but you don't want too much, right? Because you don't want him to be this beacon of charisma in this movie. And oh my god, Leo fucking nails it. He absolutely nails it.
Yeah. You kind of have to start with a very handsome, very charming actor, and then dress them down and have them because yeah, he has to be able to play both utterly contemptible, but also like you see why people would say of him like, oh yeah, he's good looking. It's like honestly, when they said he's good looking um in the movie, I was like, no, he's not. And then my brain was like, but that's Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yeah.
And then I was like, yeah, but he doesn't look like he's made his face not look like Leonardo DiCaprio just by the expression that he's holding it in.
Yeah, I mean, especially like like I think Lily Gladstone is a beautiful woman, and there's a lot of work that goes into making her look bad because she has to look so sickly for so much of
Yeah,
the movie.
yeah,
But I think the movie like allowed her to be very beautiful. And then it's like her and her sisters talking about how attractive this guy is, and you're like, you
yeah. I
sure about
guess
that?
we're judging by 1920s standards.
Yeah,
Um,
sure, sure. I mean, I think teeth is such a big thing, right? Like
yeah,
it's in some ways a cheat code. If you give someone really, really bad teeth, it's just the thing that you're always looking at.
right. Well, and also we just didn't. I think our all of our perception of what people are supposed to look like is totally blown out by the fact that we have 100 years of movies showing the most attractive people in the world and making it like, yeah, this is your neighbor. Um, you
Very
know,
true. Very
um,
true.
uh, some handsome actor. I don't know.
hmm
This is what people look like. It's like, no, they don't. People look weird. Okay,
Yeah,
people look anyway. Yeah,
and
great performance from Leo. I mean, I I I had some nitpicks. I think maybe he's a little bit too big in some places, but I didn't. Oh, overall, I thought it worked very well. I thought it was
well,
just
he's
right.
always got to do his like Leo screaming thing, right?
Hmm.
But nobody screams in this movie like like Bob De Niro's lawyer, played by the wonderful Brendan Fraser, screams in this movie.
Uh huh.
Actually, when this movie first came out, and I hadn't seen it yet, obviously because I just watched it, but there was a lot of talk on Twitter about how like what the fuck is Brendan Fraser doing in this movie? He's awful. He's terrible. And like I could not disagree more. Like he's being like big and boisterous and absurd, but like that's the point, right? Like
Yeah.
the point is that it's a circus, and he's being like he's playing his part in that circus of just he immediately stands up the second the trial starts and is like,
Yeah.
I have not talked to my client in two
Yeah.
months, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, and it's a bigger performance than anyone else in the movie, and it does almost not fit in the movie, but that's the point.
Yeah. Well, I took that as, first of all, I love that you brought that moment up because that was one of my favorite moments because like just the build up to it, it lands almost comedically and also just like shockingly because everything's been so quiet and we're quietly building up.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels like we're building up to the climactic courtroom scene
Yeah.
where it's going to be a dramatic sort of slow paced deposition on the witness stand and then like slamming into that moment is Brendan Fraser, and like the camera like cuts to him away from Leo, cuts to him at like this low angle where he's
Yep.
like looming over the frame, like you said, scream like mixed way louder than you expect. I have not seen my client, and it immediately turns into a circus, like you said. And yeah, that's the demands of the characters. He's this browbeating, overpowering presence. He's this giant guy. Like that's why you hire Brendan Fraser.
Yeah.
This
Mm-hmm.
enormous man who's like dominates you physically, and he's like later in the movie, he's like physically looming over Leo
Mm-hmm.
and like badgering him. Yeah, I thought it was perfect.
I just don't understand how people like have like just this great respect for Scorsese as a director, and then they like think that Brendan Fraser came to this movie and delivered this performance, and Scorsese was just like, I guess I have to keep this in. Like
Yeah,
if he didn't want it this way specifically, like he wouldn't have like told him to do it differently. Like it's just so absurd to assume that. And
yeah,
yeah, this is exactly Scorsese told him to play the character this way. He's doing this because of the demands of his director. It's why he was cast. It's why he's performing it this way. It's like I hate when people do this kind of stuff. It's like actors aren't sitting in a silo just making choices on their own, right?
yeah,
They're doing so at the behest of a director. And I also loved John Lithgow like having to match him in this, like having to be pulled into this and offering the most logical reasonable thing is like you can't be counsel for the prosecutor and a witness for a witness for the prosecutor and the defendant. You can't do that. And
yeah,
it's like no one's stopping it from happening though.
yeah. Yeah, that's to me the juxtaposition between this like sort of reasonable, very calm and rational John Lithgow and the way Brendan Fraser is playing this big almost tone breaking character. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's the contrast of um the attempt to sort of rationalize all of this and fit it into a modern framework where we're comfortable with it, and the world that Hale comes from. Like this gets to something I was thinking about, where this movie is described as a Western, which is really interesting because I don't think of things as happening in the 1920s
Mm,
as being something you can call a Western. And it's like,
sure.
well, okay, you can also call No Country for Old Men a Western, right? It's a genre. You can there's no rules, right? But I was like,
Yeah.
oh, interesting, 1920s Western, and I'm realizing like, well, that's actually one of the elements I enjoy about it the most. Is it's like a Western crashing into a late 20th century courtroom drama where you
Okay.
have like this more civilized world that's suddenly coming and springing itself upon this like Wild West, people murdering each other left and right. Human life has no value, and these two worlds are clashing. And I think that maybe what people are like they're correctly recognizing it as tonally dissonant. But I think that's why it's tonally dissonant.
Yeah.
It's like a character from a Western clashing into A Few Good Men, where it's like that's not it's intentionally dissonant like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I completely agree. I loved it. All right, so Lily Gladstone, going to win the Academy Award. By the way, she is going to win the best. But like, I've never been more sure of any Academy Award in my life that this woman is about to win. And frankly, uh, thrilled after watching this performance. She is incredible, and in many ways, I feel like she has the hardest job of anyone in this movie, because like we said, Leo has to like transform himself into this ugly, idiotic, incompetent, but also still semi charming version of himself. but she has to, like, you talk so much about face acting. Like, the character of Molly is so kind of protected and reserved. I think the great image is the blanket wrapped around her, right? This kind of shield or barrier that she wears around herself at all time, kind of covering herself and protecting herself from the world around her. And she has to emote and portray her character through this guard and this wall that she puts up. And it's great because it's almost the type of performance that doesn't win an Oscar. Like, it's a very reserved,
Yeah.
very quiet performance.
Right.
She doesn't have the big yelling moments, right? The big dramatic speech moments. I mean, she does get a lot of great lines and dialogue in this film, but it's quiet, it's subtle, it's twitches of her face, it's the way she looks, it's the way she reacts, it's those moments where she walks up to her husband and just like looks him in the face, and knowing what he did to her family, and what he represents, and
Right.
knowing this is a person that she loved, genuinely loved, that has done all these things to her.
Yeah.
I,
Right.
holy shit! Like, where did this woman come from? She's incredible.
Yeah, I know. I don't know, and I agree with you. The absence of the yelling, screaming parts is, if anything, the reason why she deserves the award. I mean, it's that final conversation between her and Leo is so subtle, but everything is there. You can really see on her face the suffering and anguish and disappointment and sense of loss and betrayal, and it's so subtle, and I think that's the kind of stuff I love. And I love a nice big performance now and then, but to me, I think that this kind of performance is what was called for in a true story about a person who really lived and really suffered. I think that just seems more appropriate to me.
Yeah, and the movie kind of hinges on her. I think she's the emotional heart of the thing, and her life and her experiences and everything, and I the things that make you so angry are are when you kind of fall in love with this woman, and her, like, she's kind of built in the film as really unique, right? Like, very, very strong. Like, she's surrounded by all these people that are getting sick and dying, and she is kind of, despite having her own illness in diabetes, is really carrying her family. And we meet her that way, and we meet her kind of verbally sparring with Leo in a scene that I really like, when they both are at around the table talking to each other. um and so we meet her at this point of strength, and then we see this strength kind of slowly demolished and ripped away from her. She just gets weaker and weaker, and succumbs to grief and her illness. And I was just incredibly moved by it. And, like, just when you see him pull out the freaking stuff and mix it with the insulin, you're just so fucking mad at him,
Yeah.
because it's like, man, this is your wife and she's awesome. And it's like, yes, no, I'm not saying, like, if she wasn't awesome, then it's okay to do this to her, right? I'm not saying that, but, like, at the same time, you really fall in love with this woman, and
Yeah.
it's like, how could you do this? How?
Yeah. Yeah. I agree with all that. I was impressed at how much is, I was going to say how much is done with so little, when in fact the movie is quite long. So the movie had plenty of time for us to spend with her character. I guess what's interesting, what I'm trying to figure out what I'm trying to say, actually, because I guess part of it is, and I wanted to say this at some point anyway, so I might as well say now, that, like, it's like a 3.5 hour movie, something like that, which should never happen. But that said, I more or less watched this movie in almost in one sitting, which is pretty unusual for me. If we have to watch a super long movie for any reason, I usually break it up. I usually have to break it up. And this one I should have broken up, because I ended up just staying up way too late to finish it. But that's not something that I usually do. So what I'm trying to say is this movie had me so drawn in that I kind of break my own rules about when I go to bed and everything, because I just had to finish it in
Mhm.
that marathon session. And um a big part of that, or maybe even all of that, is that you're invested in these characters and finding out what's going to happen. And what's funny is you're only invested in Leo in the sense that you want to see him get his comeuppance.
Mhm.
So really the character that you're invested in a positive sense is her character. And that's accomplished again, like through this very subtle performance, this very understated
Yeah.
performance, which is pretty interesting and unusual, I think.
Mhm. Yeah, and like I said, I wasn't aware of like all the details of the true story. So at some point I had convinced myself that she was going to die, and I had just like started emotionally preparing myself for that
Hmm.
eventuality. And I'm so glad she didn't. Although as we already discussed, she doesn't really live too much past this, because I think it is interesting, like the use of diabetes here, like it is textually like this examination of how, you know, the white people have come into this place and like ruined these people in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
It's like our diet is so stuffed with sugar even back then that the body of these native people just is not made to handle that, right? They just like could not handle it, and she gets diabetes and
Yeah.
gets very sick. And yeah, I mean, it's another small example of the ways in which, you know, I find we haven't really talked about this broadly, but like, you know, these people get very very rich. They get extremely rich extremely fast, and that's the thing. Like the thing we're taught in this country, the thing we value more than anything, is someone's ability to acquire stuff, right? And if you are one of the lucky few that get to acquire a great sum of money and things, we will respect you more because of that. And these are people that got extremely rich, that kind of, you know, entered into the American culture, right? They dressed and they dressed like white people. They you know, got cars and jewels and adorned themselves in the look of these people. They integrated themselves. And did that lead to a respect to them as people, and integration into our culture? No, a fucking course it didn't. It's
Yeah.
just, these are just the Indians pretending to be the white people, and they'll never be as good as us, even with all the money in the world. Never, ever, ever. So all we can do is take that stuff away from them as quickly as possible.
Yeah, it was a sort of clerical error that we moved your reservation to the wrong area. Sorry about that. We'll correct that by just stealing the money back. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
Just a absolutely wild story that feels like so absurd that it can't be true, but that like we dumped these people on land that nobody wanted, that we saw as worthless. And then just the oops. I know I've said this already, but just the oops factor of that is just so, it feels like it's stranger than fiction, right? It really is.
yeah. That's what's so sick about it, is you're like, there would be some feeling of irony and justice if it's like, we gave them worthless land, but it was actually worth a lot. It's like, no, well, then we like tried to murder them and take it back. So
Yeah.
it's just upsetting. And
The reveal to me that was one of the most shocking, the thing that I definitely didn't know, was the idea that we just declared them incompetent and then forced someone to oversee their money on
right.
their land that they were getting payment for from leases to the government and to oil, or like I didn't know that. And that's insane. But that's all true. That 100% true. That's what the US did.
Hmm. That's
They can't be so you have to go to someone else to ask for permission to get more of your money.
yeah.
Fucking insane.
The sort of a short story within the movie that I thought was particularly poignant and depressing was the man, and we kind of we learned a lot about him. He was the guy who was Molly's
Henry, I
ex.
think his name.
Sorry, what was his name?
Was his name Henry, I think.
I think Henry. Yeah,
This is the guy
Molly's
who tried to kill himself, and
tr-
or they
tried to
made
kill
it
himself.
they made it tried to seem like he was going to kill himself because he was melancholy, right?
Yeah, and maybe he was, but he like everything about it was just so depressing because like you were saying, there's one point where he tries to go to the bank, they won't give him any money because he doesn't have his sponsor or whatever, and it's just so dehumanizing, and you totally understand why he would be upset by this. And he goes to the doctors, and and he's like, yeah, got this incredibly bad melancholy, and they're like, what's good for that is whiskey, my man. Drink yourself to death. And then weirdly you see Hale kind of step in, and he's like, can we do anything for him? And the doctors are like, what are you talking about? He's like, and then you realize Hale has like this complicated life insurance policy on him because Hale is always doing insane things. And and then the way he dies to me is one of the most upsetting parts of the whole movie, because it's like they pay this guy to like be his friend and like basically make a habit of drinking with him at a particular spot or whatever. No, I'm not quite getting the details right, but like the point is the guy actually has to sort of become his friend to get his confidence so that he can then murder him.
Yeah.
And after the guy does this, like he botches it, first of all, because he kind of doesn't want to do it anymore by the time he actually gets up the nerve to do it, but he does it anyway, and he botches it, and then he's just like really upset about it, and then it's really easy to get him to turn at the end because he feels guilty about it.
Yeah.
Which I don't know exactly how to feel about that. It's like, despite the fact that on a cultural level these people are being dehumanized, the individuals who actually get to know them then feel a human connection with them, but then they still treat them like animals, and then they feel remorse about it, and it's just, it's all just a mess.
It's a total mess, and it's awful, and I hate it, and we're terrible. We collectively, I hate myself. Yeah, God, what a wonderful movie, though. I mean, in the worst way of meaning that possible. I guess the question here at the end, we've watched 3 of these films now. Of these 3 movies we've watched, which one do you think deserves to win Best Picture?
Well, there's sort of as soon as you ask that, my brain tries to answer which one I think is going to win Best Picture, and not which one I think it deserves to win Best Picture. And I think I currently lean toward this one, actually, in terms of which one is going to win Best Picture. In terms of which one deserves to win Best Picture, I think Oppenheimer is a pretty amazing movie. I think, like we talked about last week, it's so perfectly put together.
Yeah.
It's sort of the culmination of, like we said again last week, all of these things that Nolan has been figuring out over his whole career, sort of perfected into this masterpiece. The problem is this movie is also a masterpiece. And that those are my somewhat rambly thoughts on the matter. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I actually kind of inadvertently feel the exact opposite from you, in that I think Oppenheimer is going to win Best Picture. But I think if I had to pick of these 3, I would pick this one. Not that I don't want to take anything away from Oppenheimer. I got accused of being a Christopher Nolan hater last week, which is only half true. I really loved Oppenheimer. I really did. I agree with you. It's a masterpiece. It's probably Christopher Nolan's best film. A culmination of his career, and wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But I feel very similarly about this movie, and I'm never going to watch this movie again. That I can guarantee you. I will probably watch Oppenheimer again at some point, but I'm never going to watch this film again.
Yeah,
but it's wonderful. It's moving, it's touching, it's disturbing, it's everything it's trying to be, and it does it so well. We didn't really talk much about the actual direction of this movie, but I think this movie cost $200 million somehow, and I think a lot of that has to be like just the sets and the places they built, and the costuming, and this very extravagant stuff. I also think the editing is really interesting. I was talking to you about this online earlier today. There's moments where like weird cuts happen, like things that feel like if it was a director editor combo that I had less confidence in, I would just be like, oh, that was just a mistake in that
Mhm.
cut that they chose there. But like here, it can't be a mistake. It had to have been an intentional artistic choice. And like I don't even know what to make of those things because I'm not well versed in the language of editing enough. But like it's just like, oh, that's interesting. There's a lot going on in the editing of this film. Maybe we'll save that for another conversation down the road. But yeah, I think of these three, certainly, I think this is my favorite so far.
Yeah, that's so interesting because I don't want to fully open this can of worms, but favorite is such a tricky word for me because
Sure.
I don't think I can call this my favorite since I'm never going to watch it again, right? But I definitely appreciate the artistry of it, and I agree
Mhm.
with everything you just said about its value and merit.
Mhm.
Um, so Oppenheimer is a movie I've watched twice and will probably watch several more times. And it's like, does that make it better than this movie? Well, no, but I definitely am predisposed toward it in a different way. So that's
Yeah.
all.
Yeah, I mean, Best Picture is such a weird thing, right? Because it's political. It's like it's also like you know there's so much that goes into how the picking of this thing is done. And so like when we try to play this game at home, are we picking best? Are we picking favorite? Are we picking most likely to? I don't know. But
Yeah.
all I know is I enjoyed the shit out of this movie.
Yeah.
Just
I think we can play
brilliant,
that game
brilliant.
more as we get later in our series, maybe. But
Yeah, yeah,
for
no, I think
now, I mean, for now, I've really enjoyed all three of the movies that we've
mhm.
watched.
Yeah.
There's a chance that Barbie wins Best Picture. I mean, while we're talking about it, it's that's a great movie. It's just I think sort of compared against the like gravity of these other two, it's like I don't really see it. I have a hard time imagining the Academy voting for Barbie over either of these other two movies, which are sort of things the Academy loves to vote for, where they're both like historical dramas of enormous cultural significance.
Mhm.
So, maybe they'll surprise me though.
Yeah, I mean, we'll see.
Yeah.
One thing I know though, Matt, is Scorsese is not done yet. He's making another movie. Um, it's a movie about Jesus.
All right.
um, the story about this is actually funny because Scorsese met the Pope,
Uh-huh.
and the Pope was like, "Hey, it's been a while since people have made any movies about Jesus. People
Uh-huh.
should make some movies about Jesus." And the good Catholic that Scorsese is, he's like, "Okay, I can do that."
Yeah. Yes.
But
Yes, sir. Yeah.
like the last movie Scorsese made about Jesus was The Last Temptation of Christ, which like
Uh-huh.
pissed a lot of Catholics off. So like you think if you're the Pope that like someone needs to make another movie about Jesus, and Scorsese is like, "Oh sure." And he's like, "Not you. Let's just go. Let's do someone else."
I wouldn't be surprised if this Pope was open-minded to such a thing, though.
Mm. Yeah, no, I think you're right. It is apparently based on the movie he's making is called a Life of Jesus, which is based on a Shukasku Endo book that is about um, uh, apparently it's about Jesus's core teachings in a way that explores the principles but doesn't proselytize. So that's fun. I
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. I'm sure it'll be interesting.
Yeah, yeah. So he's gonna go from this movie about the how we're all terrible and awful and monstrous and shitty to but that Jesus guy,
Yeah. Wow.
pretty cool.
Our desperation conversation becomes weirdly relevant again.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Do 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 doof.
All right. So that's it for Killers of the Flower Moon. Matt, before we went for the week, I did just want to do our quick like 90-second reviews. Why don't you go first and tell me what TV thing you've been watching and what you thought of it?
so I don't think I've talked about this before on the show. Maybe I have, but
I think very briefly.
very briefly, I really enjoyed the first season of Reacher on Amazon.
Mhm.
Not saying that it's a transcendent work of art, especially juxtaposed with this Scorsese movie we just discussed. It's just a very fun action TV show where a very large man beats the shit out of people who really deserve it, and it's well done, it's satisfying, it's fun, it's a good sort of, police procedural, except the cop murders people who deserve to be murdered, and that's fun. It's just a fun season of television. But then, and I hate to do this because I do recommend season 1 of Reacher. Then season 2 of Reacher just feels like it was made by an entirely different group of people.
Oh
Like it's
no.
still got the same actor, but everything about it is different. The scripts feel like they were just written by sort of uh, people who are not as good at writing scripts. Not to say it nicely, you could say they have a tin ear for dialogue. And there's a lot of dialogue. It's like 100 times more talky, and all of the talking is bad.
That's
And
not good.
yeah, it's like this is not what I come to Reacher for. I am not here for the little quips. I want to watch him punch people, and there's also less punching people, and it's often not even him doing the punching. It's other people, and they're not as good at it. And so, just overall, the season's not over yet. It's mildly possible that the final episode just turns everything around for me, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Oh man.
Yeah, season 1 recommend. Season 2 quite disappointed. I don't know what happened. I haven't read up about it. Maybe there's some reason for all of this. I don't even know if this is a widely held opinion, but personally, I did not love the second season.
That's a bummer. I'm sorry. I know you were really loving that, so it makes me
Yeah.
sad.
It was a good season. No.
Well, I'm glad you got that at least.
Yeah. All right. That's my 90-second review.
All right. The thing I wanted to talk about for just 90 seconds and no more is a Showtime original series called The Curse. Yes, annoyingly enough, despite the fact that I have Amazon Prime and Paramount Plus, I cannot watch the show without also having a Showtime subscription, or rather having a Paramount Plus with Showtime subscription, because the streaming industry is broken and all this is going to collapse. Anyway, this is a television series created by Nathan Fielder of Nathan For You fame, of The Rehearsal fame, a show I talked to you about last year. That was just so weird and wonderful. He made it with Benny Safdie, one of one half of the Safdie brothers, who make just fascinating film. I don't know if you ever saw Uncut Gems, that Adam Sandler movie that came out a few years ago, that almost won him a acting Oscar.
No, I keep hearing that it was this amazing thing, but no, I haven't seen it.
It's really, really good. You need to be in a certain mood to watch it, because it will just make it's the most uncomfortable thing to watch in the world. Like it's designed to be uncomfortable. So it's like the perfect mix of Safdie weirdness and making you uncomfortable with Nathan Fielder cringe, make you uncomfortable stuff. This is a 10-episode series. It's about a husband and wife couple played by Nathan Fielder and Emma Stone, who has this year shot up to become one of my favorite actors ever. She's in this movie, and she's in the show, and she's in a movie this year called Poor Things that we will eventually be watching as part of our whole Oscars project. I've already seen that film. She's brilliant in it. She's a legitimate movie star, and she's great in this show. Basically, they play a couple that's trying to get an HGTV television show made in this small town in New Mexico about sustainable living and greenhouses and passive houses. And she's made this house that's the ugliest thing you've ever seen. It's supposed to be a completely passive house, but the entire outside is just mirrors, and it looks terrible. And it's hard to get too much into what the show is about, because it's so uncomfortable and weird. It's about the relationship between these two people. It's about people. It's about the terribleness of people, like a lot of Nathan Fielder stuff is. But it's so weird. And then the finale does a thing that is just I watched it a week ago, and I still have no idea what the fuck it means. But I was just completely blown away by it. I want to tell you it so much, but I'm not going to. It's so I mean, I think the thing I'll say is if you do not like Nathan Fielder, if you do not like the Safdie brothers, like I feel like the majority of people that watch the show absolutely despise the show because it's like meant to make you extremely uncomfortable and angry. It's like meant to do that, and it succeeds every single week. And I loved it. I loved it to death.
Well, that's great. Probably won't watch this, but I appreciate your review.
I'll tell
I
you the
don't.
thing that happens offline. Since
Okay.
you're not going to watch it, I don't want to spoil the podcast, but I'll tell you about it. It's like how do they keep giving this guy money to make things? Like it's just so wild to me that this thing exists. And the saddest part about this whole streaming industry completely collapsing is that there's just no way a thing like this gets to be made
Uh-huh.
anymore. And that like that makes me really sad.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by the cottage industry of sort of like comedians who create incredibly uncomfortable situations, and that's their whole shtick. Like Sacha Baron Cohen, I think, is another
Mhm.
example that I realize that's very different from what Nathan Fielder does, but also it is sort of the same subgenre.
Sure.
And I've never understood how he makes money either. So, um, yeah.
Absolutely wild. Like I think the cool thing about the curse is if you like go to Rotten Tomatoes and look at the critic reviews versus the audience reviews, it's like there's never been a bigger gulf between these two things because all the people that watch the show are like, "What the fuck is this?" And they hate it. And meanwhile, I'm like, "What the fuck is this? I love it."
It's wonderful.
Yeah. So that is the curse. Unfortunately, only available on Paramount Plus with Showtime. I think I didn't even have. The only reason I was able to watch it was because I learned my parents had it and was like, hell yeah, hook me up, mom. I need
Well,
this.
yeah, that's how he makes the money. Is people like you are willing to spend like $40 for for the ability to watch it.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Uh,
That's how Peacock made some money this weekend. I don't know if you heard about that. For the first time ever, an NFL playoff game was available only to watch on Peacock, and it led to a huge uptick in number of Peacock subscribers, and also just a lot of pissed off people.
uh-huh.
They're gonna just cancel it as soon. Like it's not gonna the churn on this whole thing is not gonna work out in their favor, but we'll see.
We'll see.
Yeah. All right, that was it. If you have any opinions or anything about Killers of the Flower Moon, or about season 2 of the Jack Reacher series, or about Nathan Fielder's and Betty Safdie's The Curse, please let us know. You can reach out to us via email at doofmedia@gmail.com or over on X at doofmedia. You can, of course, also go to the subreddit r/doofmedia, where you will find a thread for this episode, and you can chat there about all the stuff we talked about.
Yeah, including Reacher. If you're not already subscribed to the Doofcast, we encourage you to do so and ensure you never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else podcasts can be found.
And if you like what we do here and want to support us, consider becoming a patron of Doof Media. Head on over to patreon.com/Doof Media and pledge at any of the available levels. You get a whole bunch of bonus things, bonus podcast episodes, ability to vote and things, just a whole bunch of really cool stuff. Head over there, check it out, and support us at whatever level you can.
Yeah, and we'd also really appreciate it if you could toss us a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. Each review does help us out, gives us more exposure, and introduces new people to the content that we make here.
Yeah, and go check out our merch too, right? Yeah. We got
Yeah.
some general Doof merch over there.
We do, or we will soon, or one of the above. Yes, go check it out.
We have some, and we will have more. We're constantly adding stuff to it. Got the Doof onesie that I'm going to get from my daughter, so I can take her to daycare and that, and have people quietly wonder what the fuck that means.
What is this? Yes. Wonderful.
Yeah. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, Matt, we did say the Oscar nominations will be out on Tuesday, so the movie I'm about to pick, I'm pretty sure is going to be nominated, but we will audible if for some reason the movie I'm about to say is not nominated for Best Picture. Pretty sure it will be, but I'm just throwing that out there just in case. The movie we're going to be watching next week is a movie called The Holdovers. This is a Paul Giamatti film that is available right now on. Speaking of Peacock, it is available right now on Peacock. I think it's still also in theaters. This is supposed to be a really good movie. I've been looking forward to doing this one for a very long time. It's done by Alexander Payne. I don't know if you ever saw Sideways.
I did.
The other Paul Giamatti film that was also an Alexander Payne film. So it's the two of them reuniting for the first time in 20 years almost. I love me some Paul Giamatti. I love me some Alexander Payne, and I can't wait to see what this movie's all about.
Me too.
All right, so that will be next week. Once again, it's available on Peacock. I know you all just signed up to watch that one playoff game, to watch the playoff game that Taylor Swift was at. So now you can also watch The Holdovers.
Brilliant positioning by Peacock.
We'll see you all next week.
My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say. My name is Doof, and you'll do what I say.